Sometimes the most revealing moments in politics aren't the scandals. They're not the gaffes or the outrageous statements. They're the ordinary comments that land wrong. Not because they're extreme, but because they quietly challenge something people weren't ready to question. This is one of those moments. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said something recently, and the response wasn't what you'd expect, because the criticism didn't come from Republicans. It didn't come from Fox News or conservative Twitter. It came from progressives, from her own political coalition. And what's interesting isn't really what she said. It's why that particular sentence made people uncomfortable. So let's walk through what happened. It was a town hall. Nothing unusual. AOC holds these regularly in her district. This one was in early November, focused on economic policy and constituent concerns. Standard format, opening remarks, policy updates, then Q&A. During the Q&A, someone asked about legislative strategy, specifically about how progressives should approach negotiations with more moderate Democrats. It's a question she's answered dozens of times before. The kind of question where the answer is usually predictable. And her answer was predictable. Mostly. She talked about building coalitions, about finding common ground where possible, about the importance of getting incremental progress even when you can't get everything you want. All standard political language. The kind of thing every elected official says. But then she added something. One sentence, and it was that sentence that became the problem. She said sometimes the best way to move the party left is to help moderates win their elections first. That's it. That's the line. And if you're not deeply embedded in progressive politics, you might be thinking, what's controversial about that? It sounds pragmatic, strategic even. Help moderates win so Democrats control Congress, then push the party left from within. Seems logical, but that's not how it landed. Within hours, progressive social media lit up. Not with agreement, with pushback. Twitter threads analyzing the comment. Threads explaining why this framing was problematic. Threads from people who usually defend AOC. Some of it was direct criticism. Some of it was, I know what she meant, but some of it was concern that the comment would be used against progressives. But all of it had the same undertone, discomfort. This wasn't the reaction she usually gets. When AOC criticizes Republicans, progressives amplify it. When she criticizes corporate Democrats, progressives amplify it. When she proposes bold policy, progressives celebrate it. But this created friction. Let's look at what people were actually saying, because the specific criticisms are revealing. One common response, this sounds like the same argument moderates use to shut down progressive candidates. And there's something to that, because moderate Democrats have said for years that progressives hurt the party by primarying incumbents, that the left should wait their turn, that ideological purity threatens electoral viability. And progressives have spent years pushing back against that argument, saying that the party needs to be challenged. That change comes from pressure, not patience. That waiting for permission to advocate for your values is how nothing ever changes. So when AOC framed helping moderates as a path to moving left, it echoed the very logic progressives have been fighting against. Another response, this legitimizes the idea that progressive policies are electoral liabilities, which again touches on something real, because part of the progressive project has been proving that left policies are actually popular, that Medicare for all polls well, that higher minimum wage wins in red states, that bold climate policy has majority support. If you accept the premise that moderates need to win first, you're implicitly accepting that progressive positions might cost elections, which undermines the argument that progressive policies are the winning strategy. A third response, this is the language of surrender before the fight even starts. And this gets at something deeper, because progressive politics, especially in the last decade, has been about refusing to negotiate away demands before entering the room. It's been about starting from your actual position instead of preemptively compromising. The concern isn't that AOC secretly became a moderate. It's that this framing concedes ground that progressives have fought not to concede. Now here's where it gets complicated, because AOC almost certainly didn't mean it the way people heard it. She was probably making a tactical point about congressional math, about how you need a majority to pass anything, about how having more Democrats, even moderate ones, gives progressive legislation a better chance than Republican control. All of which is true. But the reaction wasn't really about what she meant. It was about what the statement revealed about strategic tensions within the progressive movement. Because there's a fundamental question progressives are still trying to answer. Do you prioritize electing Democrats generally, or do you prioritize electing the right kind of Democrats? And different progressives answer that differently depending on the context. In a general election against a Republican, most say elect the Democrat even if they're not progressive. In a primary, opinions split. Some say challenge incumbents if they're not representing progressive values. Others say protect incumbents to maintain stability. AOC's comments seem to tilt toward the elect Democrats first, push them left later strategy, which is a legitimate strategy. But it's not the strategy that has defined the recent progressive movement. The recent progressive movement has been about primarying Democrats who don't align with progressive values. It's been about using electoral pressure to change the party, not waiting for permission to do so. It's been about Justice Democrats and brand new Congress and organizations built specifically to challenge moderate Democrats. AOC herself came to Congress by primarying a powerful incumbent Democrat. She didn't wait for her turn. She didn't help the moderate win and then push him left. She ran against him. So when she suggested helping moderates win first, it created cognitive dissonance. Not because the tactic is wrong necessarily, but because it's the opposite of the tactic that brought her to prominence, and people noticed that contradiction. Now let's zoom out for a second. Because this dynamic isn't unique to AOC or to progressives, this happens across the political spectrum. Politicians get punished more by their own side than by their opponents. Because your opponents are supposed to disagree with you. That's expected. But your own side, they have expectations. They have standards. And when you deviate from those standards, even slightly, even tactically, the reaction is swift. It's why moderate Republicans who occasionally criticized Trump faced more backlash from conservatives than from liberals. It's why Democrats who supported Iraq war got more criticism from the left than from the right. Your opponents will attack you regardless. Your allies will abandon you if you step out of line. And the line is often narrower than it appears. What this moment suggests is that progressive politics has developed its own orthodoxy. Not about policy necessarily. Most progressives still agree on Medicare for all, Green New Deal, wealth taxes. But about strategy, about how change happens, about which compromises are acceptable and which represent capitulation. And any deviation from that strategic orthodoxy, even from someone like AOC who has been consistently progressive, triggers internal alarms. This isn't inherently bad. Movements need boundaries. They need clarity about what they stand for. If anything can be justified as strategic, then nothing means anything. But it does create a challenge, because governing requires compromise. Legislating requires math. You can't pass bills with ideological purity alone. You need votes. And sometimes those votes come from people who don't share your entire worldview. So how do you navigate that? How do you maintain your values while operating in a system that requires coalition building? Different politicians answer that differently. Some lean into purity and accept that it limits their legislative success. Others lean into pragmatism and accept that it frustrates their base. AOC has mostly managed to balance both. She's been willing to work within the system while maintaining her progressive identity. She's voted for compromise bills while continuing to advocate for bolder policy. She's been both insider and outsider, but that balance is precarious. And moments like this reveal just how precarious it is. Because once you start sounding like you're prioritizing electability over ideology, you risk losing the people who supported you specifically because you didn't do that. And once progressives start questioning whether you're still one of them, the utility of your progressive brand diminishes, which creates a bind. You need to win elections to have power. But if winning elections requires moderating your message, you lose the base that brought you to power. And if you don't moderate, you risk being labeled as someone who cares more about purity than results. There's no easy answer to that bind. And AOC's comment, however it was intended, landed right in the middle of it. What's interesting isn't whether she was right or wrong. What's interesting is that this particular framing helped moderates win first, push them left later, immediately triggered concern among progressives who usually defend her. That reaction tells us something. It tells us the progressive movement has developed a very specific theory of change. And that theory doesn't include waiting. It doesn't include helping moderates first. It includes confronting power directly, even when that power exists within your own party. Whether that's the right strategy is debatable, but it's clearly the dominant strategy within progressive politics right now. And anything that sounds like deviation from it, even from someone with AOC's credibility, meets resistance. Which raises a question: how much strategic flexibility do progressive politicians actually have? If you can't talk about coalition building without being accused of betraying the movement, how do you build coalitions? If you can't acknowledge the reality of congressional math without being called a sellout, how do you legislate? And if the standard for maintaining progressive credibility is never acknowledging trade-offs, never discussing tactics that sound moderate, never suggesting that incremental progress might sometimes be necessary, does that standard make progressive governance impossible? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're the questions progressive politics is going to have to answer. Because winning elections is one thing, governing effectively is another. And right now, it's not clear that the progressive movement has figured out how to do both while maintaining ideological coherence. AOC's comment wasn't a betrayal. It wasn't a pivot to the center. It was probably just a tactical observation about electoral math. But the reaction to it suggests that even tactical observations can feel like threats. When the stakes are this high, when trust is this fragile, when the difference between ally and enemy can feel like one sentence, even the most routine comments become tests of loyalty. And that's what makes this moment worth paying attention to. Not because of what was said, but because of what the reaction revealed about the space progressive politicians have to operate in, and how narrow that space has become.